Namaste and welcome back, listeners. Today we have quite the story to delve into. It's one filled with a bit of old money, a touch of what we could call wishful thinking, and a son caught between the two.
It's true.
We're going to meet Bhavani, who, well, let's just say he loves to remember the good old days. Then there's his wife, Rashmani, very practical, very down to earth. And then their son, Kalipada, trying to find his way in a world that his father maybe doesn't quite grasp anymore.
Yes. And as we unravel this story, we'll see how the changing fortunes of this family really shape their lives and relationships. We're in rural Bengal, by the way, for this one.
Right. So let's start with Bhavani and this feeling of loss that he just can't seem to shake. Our man belonged to a well-regarded family, the Saniaries. But things got a little complicated, you see, when his father decided to remarry.
Ah, yes, the stepmother.
Now, this new father-in-law, he was a clever one. He made sure that his daughter, Bhavani's mother, Rajasundari, a fine name that had her own share of the family property, settled on her, just in case she became a widow.
Which, as fate would have it, is exactly what happened. Not long after Bhavani was born, his father, Ahayacharan, passed away, leaving Vrajasundari to raise their young son alone.
And here's where it gets a bit more, shall we say, intriguing. You see, Bhavani had an older half-brother from his father's first marriage, Shamacharan. Now, despite this division of property, Shamacharan treated Bhavani like his own.
A truly noble gesture.
He never touched a penny of his stepmother's share, even giving her detailed accounts every year with proper receipts.
That's almost unheard of, especially back then.
The folks in the neighborhood, they were surprised. Some even thought Shamacharan was a bit of a fool for not trying to, undo that division. It makes you think about what people valued in those days, doesn't it?
Absolutely. This highlights that age-old tension, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Between personal integrity and the pressure to grab whatever you can, especially within families.
Yeah.
Shamacharan stands out here, his honesty shining through. He truly earned Rajasundari's trust. She considered him as dear as her own son.
Now, Shamacharan, he was strict with his own children, but Bhavani, freedom, my friend, that's what he got. Maybe a little too much freedom, if you ask me. While Shamacharan's son, Thanapada, was learning the ropes of managing the estate, Bhavani's education, well, let's just say it wasn't a priority. He relied on Shamacharan for everything, just signing documents without a second thought.
Setting the stage, you might say, for Bhavani's later struggles with practical matters.
Indeed. And then came another twist. Shamacharan passed away. After the mourning period, Thanapada came to Bhavani with a proposal they should live separately, he said. Avoid any misunderstandings that could cause bad blood. Bhavani, who had never even considered managing his own affairs, was taken aback. He saw their world as one big, happy family, not something to be divided. But when he realized Thanapada was serious, his main concern became how to split the property with minimal fuss.
But Thanapada had a surprise for him.
Oh, indeed. Turns out the property was already divided. Their grandfather, the clever one, had anticipated potential conflicts and given a portion to Bhavani's mother to prevent any future legal battles. Bhavani had no clue about this, not a whisper.
A secret kept well hidden.
Imagine his shock. So he goes to his mother, Rajasundari, and tells her about this. She's just as surprised. You see, what she received from her husband was her dowry. A small income, nothing to do with their ancestral property. She couldn't understand why Bhavani should be deprived of his rightful share. And then she drops a bombshell. She tells him her husband had made 2 copies of his will, and one, she claims, was still in her box. But when they opened it, all they found was a deed of gift for her dowry. The will had vanished. Now that raises a very interesting question, doesn't it?
A missing will. Oh, the plot thickens.
It does, doesn't it? So what do? They turn to Bhagala for help. He's the son of their family guru, you see.
The son who handles the, shall we say, more worldly matters.
Precisely. Bhagala initially advises that if the will's gone, they should just divide the property equally between the brothers. Makes sense, right? But just then, a copy of a will, seemingly from their grandfather, suddenly appears.
How convenient.
Convenient for the other side, that's for sure. This new will doesn't even mention Bhavani, and leaves everything to the grandsons. Now remember, Bhavani didn't even have a son at this point.
So with Bhagala's guidance, Bhavani embarked on a legal battle to reclaim what he believed was rightfully his.
Oh, he did. But despite all their efforts, the case was lost. The ancestral property went to Tharapada's family, and even the land given to his mother dwindled, barely enough to keep them afloat. It was a blow, a real blow, to their pride and their lifestyle. Tharappada moved away, and they never saw each other again.
A sad ending to a brotherly relationship.
Truly. Pavani's mother, she saw this as a betrayal, a deep wound that never healed. She clung to the belief that the real will would be found someday. And Bhavani, so lost in the practical world, found solace in her unwavering faith.
It's almost as if he retreated into a world of denial.
Yes, he did. He seemed oblivious to their growing poverty, their struggles to put food on the table, to maintain those old traditions. It was all a temporary inconvenience to him.
A waiting game until his grand return to prosperity.
Exactly. When his fine clothes wore out, he'd chuckle and think, these people don't understand. This is just a phase. Soon I'll be back in my rightful place. It's fascinating how the mind works, isn't it? Creating these alternate realities to cope with harsh situations.
A psychological defense mechanism, you could say.
Indeed. And his conversations with his loyal servant, Nojeto, all about those grand plans for the future, as if they were still living in the lap of luxury.
Delusions of grandeur, perhaps?
Maybe. But then a glimmer of hope arrived, the birth of his son, Kalipada.
The heir apparent.
And according to the horoscope, this boy was destined to bring back their lost fortune. You see, it all comes back to that will, doesn't it? This belief, it transformed Bhavani, that amused acceptance of poverty. Gone. Now it was a burden, a heavy one, because he felt responsible for this new heir to the Sanieri legacy.
A legacy built on sand, one might argue.
Perhaps, but to Bhavani it was real. He imagined a glorious future for Kalipada and couldn't bear the thought of not celebrating his birth in the grand old style. He felt like he was failing his son already. So, to compensate, he showered Kalipada with affection and gifts, spoiling him rotten.
A classic case of overcompensation, perhaps fueled up with guilt.
Now, onto Rashmani, Bhavani's wife. She was a completely different kettle of fish, oh my, yes. Those dreams of past glory, she don't care for them one bit. Bhavani knew this, of course. He'd smile to himself, thinking it was typical of her humble Vaishnava background.
A clash of values right from the start.
You could say that. Rashmani, she was practical to the core. Her only concern was her son's well-being. While Bhavani would happily discuss the missing will with anyone who would listen, he never breathed a word of it to his wife. Her disinterest made him drop the subject entirely.
A wise move, perhaps.
Maybe, but she had her hands full dealing with their shrinking resources, mind you. All those people who still depended on them, expecting to be looked after without lifting a finger. It all fell on Rashmani's shoulders.
The burden of responsibility.
The constant struggle wore her down, and she faced criticism for her frugality, her strictness. Even Bhavani would complain, saying it wasn't how things were done in the Sanieri household. But Rashmani took it all in stride, never complaining, accepting the blame. She tightened their belts, managed the dwindling property with an iron fist, and became, well, not very popular, let's just say.
A woman of steel, facing a mountain of challenges.
She was, and she did it all while shielding Bhavani from the harsh realities. She knew his nature, you see, and actively kept him idle.
Protecting him from himself, in a way.
In a way, yes. You see, before Kalipada was born, all her love, both motherly and wifely, was focused on Bhavani. She saw him as a grown-up child, someone who needed looking after. And after his mother died, she became both mother and master of the house. She had to adopt a stern demeanor, a no-nonsense approach to keep things running and protect her family.
A formidable woman indeed. So while Bhavani lived in his world of dreams, Rashmani faced reality head-on, managing their reduced circumstances and safeguarding her family.
Now, when it came to Kalipada, their parenting styles were like night and day. Bhavani, he accepted Rashmani's authority over himself, but her strictness with their son, oh, that was hard for him to swallow.
The clash of parenting philosophies.
Exactly. Rashmani, she didn't see Kalipada through those rose-tinted glasses of family pride. She knew their situation, and while she took care of Bhavani's every need, even hiding their shortages from him, she raised Kalipada differently.
Preparing him for the real world, perhaps.
You could say that. For Kalipada, there were no fancy meals or expensive clothes. Rashmani told his teacher to be strict, to use the rod if he didn't study. It pained Bhavani to see his son treated this way. He felt guilty, like he was depriving him of his birthright. But, used to bowing to those in charge, he didn't have the courage to stand up to his wife. Even the clothes Kalipada wore on festivals were of such poor quality that in their old life, even the servants would have protested.
It's a heartbreaking contrast, isn't it?
It is. Rashmani would try to reason with him, saying Kalipada had never known their former wealth. He'd be happy with what he had. But this sad ignorance of his supposed destiny, as Bhavani saw it, it just deepened his sorrow.
So while Bhavani tried to shower Kalipada with gifts, Rashmani focused on discipline and practicality.
And then comes the episode of the foreign doll. It's a telling little story. You see, Bugla, our worldly friend, had become quite wealthy thanks to his involvement in Pavani's legal battle.
Profiteering from misfortune.
You could say that. Anyway, Bugla had a habit of buying cheap trinkets from Calcutta before festivals to sell in the village. And one time, he brought back a marvel. A doll dressed as a foreign woman, one that fanned herself when you wound it up. Kalipada was smitten. And knowing better than to ask his mother, he went straight to Bhavani, begging him to buy it. Bhavani, of course, readily agreed, but his heart sank when he heard the price.
The limitations of a dwindling purse.
And who controlled the purse strings? Rashmani, of course. So, Bhavani approaches her cautiously, beating around the bush before finally blurting out his request. And her response?
Let me guess. Are you mad?
Word for word. Desperate, Bhavani tries to cut back on his own comforts, suggesting he doesn't need milk pudding every day, that plain rice would do. But Rashmani sees right through him. She points out he's never had any digestion problems, and those little luxuries, well, they're family traditions. She couldn't bear to see him deprive himself.
A loving wife, despite their differences.
She was, in her own way. Defeated, Bhavani goes to Bugla, hoping to strike a deal. He even offers an expensive old cashmere shawl in exchange for the doll. But Bugla, clever as he is, knows he can't be seen with such a valuable item in the village, especially not with Rashmani around.
A wise refusal.
Indeed. So, Bhavani returns home empty-handed, his shawl and his hopes dashed. Kalipada keeps asking for the doll, and Bhavani keeps putting him off with promises. The pressure is mounting, the guilt is eating him alive.
A father's love, tangled with a web of financial constraints.
Exactly. Finally, Rashmani, seeing Bhavani's misery, takes matters into her own hands. She sits Kalipada down and explains that wanting something you can't afford is like stealing. It's the first time she's spoken to him this way, with such gentleness, and it leaves a mark on the boy. He starts to understand, just a little, what his parents are going through, but he still really wants that doll.
The heart of a child, innocent and full of desire.
Rashmani, she tries to be firm, but seeing her son's sadness and her husband's quiet desperation, it softens her. And guess what? The next day, she reveals a cardboard box tied with string, and inside, the foreign doll fanning away merrily.
No, she didn't buy it.
No, she didn't. She hired it from Bugala for a few rupees a day. It was a clever solution, a way to fulfill her son's wish without breaking the bank.
And a valuable lesson for Kalipada.
Oh, absolutely. He got to enjoy the doll for a day, show it off to his friends, and then return it, understanding that everything comes at a price. From that day on, he became his mother's confidant, helping her with daily tasks, learning the value of hard work. That doll episode, it was a turning point for him, a moment of growth.
It's fascinating how such seemingly small events can have such a profound impact on a child's development.
Now, years later, Kalipada wins a scholarship. Imagine Bhavani's joy. But he suggests his son should quit his studies and look after their remaining property. You know, the practical thing, the Chowdhury way.
Back to those old ways of thinking.
But Kalipada had other plans. He wanted to finish his education, go to Calcutta. He told his mother he'd never be a real man otherwise. And Rashmani. She backed him all the way.
She understood the importance of education, even if Bhavani didn't.
Exactly. And she cleverly played her cards, enlisting Bugala's help to convince Bhavani. Bugala, ever the opportunist, claimed Kalipada could become a lawyer and win back their lost property. It worked like a charm. And before Kalipada left for the big city, Rashmani gave him 50 rupees, her entire savings, a little nest egg for emergencies. It was a symbol of her love, her sacrifices, and Kalipada vowed never to spend it.
A mother's love, embodied in a single note.
From then on, Bhavani's obsession shifted. The stolen will took a back seat to his son's education. Every letter from Kalipada became a grand event. He'd read them aloud to the whole village, misinterpreting everything through his own warped lens, of course. Like when he heard about a new bridge over the Ganges, he lamented about how even animals would cross the holy river without washing their feet, a sign of the world's decline.
Stuck in his own worldview, unable to grasp the changing times.
But despite these dramatic pronouncements, he loved sharing those important updates from his son. It was his new pride and joy.
A vicarious sense of accomplishment.
Exactly. Meanwhile, Kalipada was facing a very different reality in Calcutta, living on a shoestring budget even with his scholarship, tutoring to make ends meet. He rented a tiny room in a student boarding house, far cry from the comforts he'd never even known. He kept his poverty a secret, remembering his promise to his mother to stay away from wealthy companions.
A responsible young man determined to make his own way.
But his poverty, it became a source of conflict, would you believe it? You see, there was this chap living upstairs, Sailen. Rich, condescending fellow, but he liked living in the mess, for the company.
The big man on campus.
Exactly. He enjoyed playing the patron, buying everyone treats, lending money that no one intended to repay. It was all about his perceived generosity, but he couldn't stand anyone refusing his help.
Pride and a need for control, perhaps.
Maybe. So you can imagine how Kalipada, with his worn-out clothes and his old-fashioned ways, stuck in his books in that damp room, irritated him. Sailen and his cronies, they just couldn't stand Kalipada's refusal to accept their charity and his obvious poverty. It was an affront to their self-proclaimed generosity.
A classic case of looking down on those less fortunate.
They started harassing him, making noise to disturb his studies, even stealing one of his cheap shoes and replacing it with an expensive one just to mock him. They even planted a silver cigarette case in his room and then found it, accusing him of theft.
How cruel.
It was, wasn't it? And even when Kalipada surprised them by contributing 5 rupees to the Saraswati Puja collection, a huge sum for him, it only made them dislike him more. They couldn't understand why this poor fellow wouldn't accept their help, their superiority. Kalipada's health started to decline, all that hardship and overwork taking their toll. But he didn't tell his father, not a word.
Hiding his struggles to protect his family.
And then, things took a turn for the worse. Sailen and his gang broke into Kalipada's room while he was out. And what did they find? That 50-rupee note, the one from his mother. They pocketed it, finding it amusing, this stingy precaution of a poor student.
A violation not just of his belongings, but of his mother's sacrifice.
Exactly. When Kalipada discovered the theft, he finally lost his cool. He confronted Sailen and his friends, demanding his money back, but they just laughed at him, mocked him, dragged him back to his room, and locked him in.
Bullies, plain and simple.
Sailen, just to add insult to injury, even suggested throwing a 100-rupee note at him. The others insisted on a written apology first, as if they were the victims.
A complete lack of empathy and understanding.
Totally. The next morning, they'd almost forgotten about Kalipada, but they heard him mumbling in his room, delirious. They tried calling out to him, even saying they'd found his note, but there was no response. Worried he'd gone mad with grief, Sailen sent for a doctor.
Guilt setting in.
Perhaps. When they break down the door, Kalipada was unconscious, burning with fever. The doctor said they had to contact his family. Sailen, he didn't even know Kalipada's name, let alone his family. So he went through his things, hoping to find some clue. And that's when he discovered those bundles of letters from his mother, from his father. He saw the address, Sanyari, the house of the Chowdhuries, and the name Bhavani.
The moment of truth.
It was. Sailen's grandfather was none other than Shama Charan, Bhavani's half-brother. He had no idea about Bhavani's son Kalipada or their poverty. Now he felt not just guilt, but a strange sense of pride in this distant relative who'd refused his help.
A newfound respect born from a shared history and a moment of crisis.
Sailen, he immediately moved Kalipada to a better house and sent word to Bhavani. Rashmani, bless her, she sent all their savings, urging her husband not to worry about the cost. She couldn't go herself, you see, wasn't considered proper for a woman of their family to travel to Calcutta unless absolutely necessary, so she stayed back and prayed.
A woman of tradition and unwavering faith.
When Bhavani arrived, Kalipada was still unconscious, delirious. He kept calling out, "Master Mashai!" It broke Bhavani's heart. Even though the doctor saw a slight improvement, Bhavani couldn't believe his son wouldn't recover. He was touched by Sailen's kindness, thinking it was just his city manners.
Little did he know the real reason behind Sailen's change of heart.
And then Kalipada woke up. Imagine his surprise seeing his father. His first thought was that his father would find out about his poverty, be mocked by these city folk. He didn't even recognize his surroundings. He thought his father had moved him somehow, but couldn't understand how he could afford it.
His mind still clouded by illness and worry.
And while Bhavani was out, Sailen came to Kalipada carrying a plate of grapes. He begged for forgiveness, even touched Kalipada's feet, a gesture of deep respect. Kalipada, he saw the sincerity in Sailen's eyes and was moved. He had always admired Sailen from a distance, you see, but thought the social gap was too wide.
A bridge built by guilt and a newfound sense of kinship.
He accepted those grapes, and in that silent gesture, he accepted Sailen's apology. Kalipada, he was amused by the friendship that blossomed between his father and Sailen. Sailen started calling Bhavani grandfather and would joke about stealing his delicious chutneys from the absent grandmother. Kalipada found immense joy in seeing Sailen's appreciation for his mother's simple cooking.
A heartwarming connection, forged from unexpected circumstances.
Those days of recovery, they became the happiest of Kalipada's short life. But there was one thing that bothered him. His father's talk about their past wealth, and especially that stolen will, which Bhavani still believed would be found.
Still clinging to that dream.
Oh, he was! But Kalipada saw it as a delusion, a source of embarrassment, especially when his father shared these stories with Sailen. Sailen, to his credit, would try to gently steer Bhavani away from those topics, but it never worked. Kalipada would cringe, worried Sailen would get the wrong idea about his father.
A son's loyalty clashing with his awareness of their changed reality.
Exactly. Kalipada, despite his lingering headaches, was eager to get back to his studies. He worried about losing his scholarship and secretly started reading again, ignoring the doctor's advice. He urged his father to return home, assuring him he was fine. And Bhavani, well, he was missing Rashmani's care, and he didn't need much convincing.
Eager to return to his familiar comforts.
But on the morning of Bhavani's planned departure, tragedy struck. He found Kalipada burning with fever, delirious again. All that studying through the night had taken its toll. The doctor's verdict was swift and brutal. This relapse would be fatal. Sailen insisted that Kalipada needed his mother.
A final act of kindness and redemption.
Indeed. Rashmani arrived that evening, but she only had a few precious hours with her son before he passed away. She bore the immense pain with remarkable strength, her focus on comforting her heartbroken husband.
A mother's strength in the face of unimaginable loss.
That night, as Rashmani slept from exhaustion, Bhavani couldn't rest. He wandered into Kalipada's childhood study room. It was filled with little reminders of his son's life. A torn quilt Rashmani had made, charcoal drawings on the wall, old school books, a single forgotten slipper from when he was just a baby.
Poignant memories imbued with a newfound significance.
Bhavani sat there, surrounded by these silent witnesses to his son's life, his grief a heavy weight in the quiet room. He opened the window and looked out at Kalipada's little garden, overgrown with passion flowers he'd planted. The thought of not having Kalipada to wait for during those summer holidays just overwhelmed him. He cried out, a cry of pure anguish. And then he heard footsteps in the garden, in the rain.
Oh no, not another delusion.
It seemed so. He thought it was Kalipada returning. He saw a figure, the same height as his son, their face hidden by a cloak. He rushed out, calling out, "My boy!" But when he reached the spot, there was no one there. He searched the garden in the pouring rain, calling out his son's name, but only the wind answered.
A heartbreaking scene fueled by grief and longing.
Noto, his faithful servant, found him and led him back inside. The next morning, while cleaning Kalipada's room, Noto discovered a bundle under the window. It was the missing will. Bhavani recognized it instantly. He rushed to Rashmani, exclaiming, "It's the will! It's finally here!"
After all these years.
Rashmani, ever practical, asked him, "Who gave it to you?" And Bhavani, he simply said, "He came last night. He himself gave it to me." And then she asked, "What will you do with it?" Bhavani looked at her and said, "I have no need of it now," and he tore it to pieces.
Wow. Just like that, he let go of his lifelong obsession.
It was a powerful moment. His son's death had changed everything. The will, that symbol of his past, his dreams, his grievances, it all seems so insignificant now. Word spread through the village, of course, about the will's reappearance and its destruction. Bagala, always ready to take credit, proudly declared that his prediction had come true. But the grocer, Ramcharan, he had a different story. He'd seen a young man who looked a lot like Sailen asking for the Chowdhury's house late the previous night, carrying a bundle.
So it seems Sailen was the one who returned the will.
It does, doesn't it? A silent act of atonement, a final gesture of respect for his distant cousin and his family. What a story, eh? It makes you think about family, about loss, about what truly matters in life.
It does. Bhavani and Rashmani, they coped with their changed circumstances in such different ways. Bhavani retreated into dreams, while Rashmani faced reality head-on, both driven by love for their son. And Kalipada, he navigated a difficult world with resilience and a strong sense of responsibility. It makes you wonder, what really defines a family's legacy? Is it material wealth, or is it something deeper, something that endures even in the face of loss? Something to ponder, isn't it?
It is indeed. And on that note, we'll leave you to your thoughts. Until next time, listeners.